I came home from a 3-day business trip and found 40 tons of steel and diesel parked on my lawn, and 3 days later the president of my HOA was screaming at a police officer demanding he arrest me for locking those trucks in. That was the moment I realized this was never about landscaping or a community project. It was about how far someone will go when they decide your property belongs to them. When I pulled into my driveway that afternoon, I just sat there with the engine running, staring. 2 dump trucks were parked in my side yard like they owned the place. Not near the road, not half on the curb, fully on my grass. Deep ruts carved straight through the lawn I'd spent 7 years maintaining. Grass flattened into mud irrigation heads crushed like soda cans, and a dark stain spreading slowly beneath one of the trucks where diesel was leaking into the soil. Nobody had called me. Nobody had asked. Nobody had even bothered to leave a note on my door. I shut off the engine and stepped out of the car, walking slowly, like maybe if I moved carefully enough the trucks would turn out to be a mistake. They didn't. They were real. 40 tons of heavy equipment sitting casually on private property as if my land were just overflow space for someone else's convenience. My neighbor Cheryl was at her mailbox across the street. She saw me standing there and walked over, already looking uncomfortable. Before I could even ask, she told me the HOA president, Carol Martin, had arranged it. There was a renovation project at the community entrance, and apparently Carol had decided my lot had enough space to stage the trucks so the association wouldn't have to pay for storage. Cheryl said it like she was apologizing for something she hadn't done. I thanked her and went inside. I didn't yell. I didn't storm over to Carol's house. I didn't post anything online. Instead, I opened the filing cabinet in my home office and pulled out 2 documents I'd kept since the day I bought the house: my property deed and the HOA bylaws. The deed was clear. I owned 4 acres, including every inch of the side yard where those trucks now sat. The plat map showed the boundary line running well inside the area they were occupying. The bylaws were even clearer. No community project could use private property without written consent from the owner. I had never given consent. No one had ever asked. I took photos, lots of them. The ruts from different angles, the diesel stain with a ruler next to it, the broken irrigation heads, the license plates on the trucks. 47 photos in total, each one time-stamped. I didn't know exactly how I'd need them yet, but I knew I would. That night I called Carol Martin. She answered with that bright, efficient tone people use when they're used to being in charge. I told her who I was and asked about the trucks on my property. She didn't hesitate. She said they were there for the community project and would be gone in a few weeks. When I asked why no one had requested my permission, she paused just long enough for it to register, then said she didn't think she needed to. It was community work, she said, like that phrase erased property lines and consent. I told her I'd be in touch and ended the call. I didn't argue. I didn't threaten. I started a folder on my computer, labeled it with the date, and began documenting everything. A week passed. The trucks didn't move. A third vehicle showed up, an equipment trailer carrying a backhoe that sank even deeper into the damaged turf. On the 10th day, I noticed water pooling near the fence line. The weight of the vehicles had cracked the main irrigation line under the yard. The plumber's estimate was $1,200. Landscaping repairs would be another $800. A surveyor to formally confirm the boundary, $400 more. The total damage was climbing past $2,000, and not a single person from the HOA had acknowledged any of it. I sent a formal email to the entire HOA board, 5 people all copied. I laid out the facts, attached photos, listed the damages, and asked for immediate removal of the vehicles and reimbursement for repairs. Carol responded the next morning. "The project benefits everyone, including you," she wrote. "A little inconvenience is part of community living." She suggested I be more cooperative. That was when things started to shift. Neighbors who used to wave suddenly looked away. Cheryl told me quietly that Carol had been discussing me in the community message group, calling me difficult and uncooperative. I asked Cheryl to forward the messages. She did. I didn't respond publicly. Arguments online don't create accountability. Records do. I hired a licensed surveyor. He confirmed what I already knew. Every single vehicle was entirely on my land. Not one tire touching HOA common area. I filed a public records request for the renovation project contract. When it arrived, I read it twice, then a third time slower. The contractor was Martin Excavation Services. I searched the state business registry. The registered owner was Greg Martin, Carol's husband. There was no line item in the budget for equipment staging, no disclosure of a conflict of interest. Carol had decided to save money by using my land while awarding a contract to her own spouse. That was the moment my frustration hardened into resolve. I sent Carol a certified letter. Unauthorized use of private property, documented damages, repeated requests ignored, 72 hours to remove the vehicles. If not, I would take appropriate measures to secure my property as permitted under state law. She signed for it 2 days later. The deadline passed. The trucks didn't move. I spent the next morning with a fencing company installing temporary chain-link panels around all 3 vehicles. 6 feet tall, steel posts, a commercial-grade padlock, 1 gate, locked. A sign bolted to the fence read, "Private property. Vehicles parked without authorization. Contact the property owner for retrieval." I took photos from every angle and checked my watch. 9:01. The deadline was over. I wasn't impounding the trucks. I wasn't stealing them. I was securing my land. The distinction mattered. 43 minutes later, Greg Martin's pickup truck pulled up. He tested the gate, read the sign, and his face shifted from confusion to anger to something close to panic. 12 minutes after that, Carol arrived, tires squealing as she pulled into my driveway without permission. She didn't knock. She went straight to the fence and started shouting. I stayed on my porch. She demanded I open the gate, told me it was community property, told me I was making a huge mistake. I held up the survey, calmly told her my deed, and a licensed professional disagreed. She threatened me. I told her she was welcome to call the police. She did. When the officer arrived, I handed him everything: the deed, the survey, the bylaws, the certified letter with her signature. He walked the fence, read the sign, and came back. He told Carol this was a civil matter. The property owner had the right to secure his land. There was no crime here. That's when Carol lost control. She yelled, accused me of holding equipment hostage, demanded the officer force me to open the gate. I watched neighbors gather at the edges of their lawns. I noticed my daughter upstairs recording on her phone. The officer told Carol he couldn't compel me to give access to my own property and suggested she speak to an attorney. She turned to me, face flushed, and said this wasn't over. She was right. It wasn't. She called an emergency HOA meeting, framing it as obstruction of a community project. I spent the weekend organizing my documentation, feeling the weight of it all. There was a moment late Sunday night when I sat at my desk and wondered if I'd gone too far, if locking the gate had been a mistake, if maybe it would have been easier to just let it go, fix the lawn myself, and move on. I thought about the looks from my neighbors, the tension, the stress creeping into my own home. For a few minutes, I almost convinced myself I was the problem. Then I looked at the photos again, the ruts, the oil stain, the email where she said she didn't need permission. And I remembered why I started this in the first place. Because if I didn't draw the line here, there would never be one. The clubhouse was packed. Carol opened by naming me, directly accusing me of sabotaging the project and imprisoning equipment worth hundreds of thousands of dollars because I didn't want tire marks on my grass. She proposed a fine and demanded the fence be removed. When it was my turn, I walked to the front and showed 3 things: the survey, her email, the business registry showing her husband owned the contracting company. I asked one question: was this conflict of interest disclosed before the contract was approved? No one answered. I played the video of her screaming at the police officer. When it ended, Carol stood, opened her mouth, and said nothing. She walked out. The board voted against the fine and opened an investigation. 6 weeks later, I received a check covering every dollar of documented damage. 3 weeks after that, Carol resigned. The trucks were removed quietly. The grass grew back. And the assumption that my land was someone else's convenience died with her authority. Every boundary has a law that protects it. All I did was make sure both were visible.